If you will consent to burden your soul with a vow that you should never make and a knowledge you should never dream about, I will promise you in return...
You will promise me in return?
I will promise you a very entertaining evening.
Your offer is far too idiotic to be declined. Permit me here and now to promise as a good comrade and a fellow artist that I will not report any of this, whatever it is, to the police.
In this previous conversation, the previous 2 minutes, I heard knee slides. I heard everything. Don't get me wrong, Mario. I heard knee slides, and then I heard The Cure. And all that's going through my head is Robert Smith trying to do knee slides on stage or something. I'm trying to visualize that.
Oh, man, that's amazing.
Awesome. That's cool.
Imagine Plain Song with...
Yeah, right? Like a slow motion knee slide. He's just like...
That's
with the hair just going back.
It's rolling.
Welcome to Abandoned Albums, the documentary podcast where we take a closer look at your favorite albums from yesterday, from today, and from tomorrow. I'm your host, Keith R. Higgins, and joining me is the Knight of Knowledge, Sir Geoff Calhoun.
Wow. Lofty expectations, my friend.
Good evening. Since we're all strangers to each other, let's get acquainted with a drink, shall we?
On this episode of Abandoned Albums, Keith and Geoff welcome Mario Quintero of Spotlights into Thunderlove Studio.
You know that feeling, Keith, when you love music as intensely as we do, and you kind of scour the musical landscape in search of that jam?
I do.
I think when you have that hunger, the search for new never ends. The more you search, the harder it gets to really be blown away by somebody.
Correct.
And I've found over time, it's harder for someone to strike me as something truly original and different. And so when it happens, buddy, I lose my chili. My bandmate is somebody that really knows my taste intimately. So in 2016, he sent me this record. The album title was Tidals by a band called Spotlights. The very first track I put on from Tidals, and I'm a headphone guy. I really like to put on a nice pair of headphones. For this particular experience, I had my headphones on, hit play, and I've been a fan ever since. There is a magic and a uniqueness. They're brain-smashingly good. And I will pull on a couple of strings to try and create a tapestry for a listener. They pull on My Bloody Valentine. You might hear The Cure as an influence. You might hear some of the more modern heavy rockers like Deftones or the Melvins as influences. But make no mistake, this is an original thing happening with the group Spotlights.
Who's in Spotlights?
Spotlights is a three-piece. It's Mario Quintero and his wife Sarah, and then Chris Enriquez. Mario and Sarah are kind of the brains. Chris started off as like a hired gun where they had all the drums programmed and they needed somebody to tour live with. He is a very well documented drummer, an incredible a really hard striker, somebody that you worry is going to punch through the drum head every time he hits it. And he has evolved into a contributing member. But this thing started in Mario's head, I think, Mario and Sarah. And I can't imagine them ever being more than a three-piece. They're self-contained. But for a three-piece, the biggest sounding three-piece in the world. A band that is not for the faint of heart. They are loud and intense. You do yourself a disservice if you listen to this band with your volume set to 2. You gotta crank it. It must be loud. It begs to be loud. They are much more than just guitar, bass, drums. You hear shit in the mixes that's like, is that a handbell? Is that an organ? Is that... There are lovely elements that he splashes in to color the music that really demonstrate a superior range of frequency knowledge. And there is a richness to the music that is rewarding. There's beauty in this music. There are haunting themes. It's smart. I really, really think they're worth paying attention to. And I think this new record is going to change some people. They're worth adding to your record collection. Put it on the turntable. Crank your speaker as loud as you're comfortable with. Sit back and soak.
Wow, let's see what Mario has to share with us.
I love it. Here is our conversation with Mario Quintero.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Jeff, good to see you again.
Good to see you again, buddy.
Oh, look at this. You guys are old mates.
Yeah, we met like at a show, right? At a Failure show?
We met at the Failure show in Pittsburgh first. And then
Have you met before that? I can't remember. I think that's the first time I remember meeting.
I think I was just a fan, added you on Facebook or something like that. And then,
Gotcha.
Recognized you at the show. I was like, oh my God, that's the dude from Spotlights. And then you probably felt like I was stalking you after, seeing you at Furnace Fest when you were there doing sound for Quicksand.
That's right.
And
that's right.
I don't think we were introduced, but the first time I saw you guys was at that little cool little bowling alley in Cleveland, Mahal's.
Oh, shit. Wow.
I think the best place for us to start is at the beginning.
Sounds good.
And I will say, I will tell you, as a pretty big fan of the band, in preparation for the conversation today, I went back and listened to Sleep Lady.
Nice.
Now, were you and Sarah both in Sleep Lady?
Yeah, we were both. It was the two of us and then our friends Mike and Christy. Mike Hayden being kind of like the main songwriter in that band, and then our friend Tony played drums.
Okay, so if you're listening to this and you're already a Spotlights fan, I think it's really worth going back and checking out. I both love and hate subgenres as trying to pin a sound down.
Sure.
But, I think that Spotlights does have some math rock elements, some of that sort of post rock. And Sleep Lady, if there were any vocals, I don't remember. I remember thinking this would be an excellent band to pair with somebody like Russian Circles or Pelican,
Totally.
That are in that sort of math rock, instrumental, but still heavy rock and roll.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I'd call Pelican or Russian Circles metal.
Maybe instrumental post metal, really, because but again, yeah, we got compared to like Portishead a lot, like a really heavy Portishead back in the day. Yeah, we loved playing in that band, man. It was awesome. We ended up moving to New York shortly after that band ended. And Mike and Christy moved to Chicago, so we kind of just parted ways. But who knows? We're still really good friends with both of them, and maybe someday it'll end up coming back together. I've been bugging him a lot to get everything on Spotify, to at least get everything streaming.
Yeah.
Because right now it's still just on Bandcamp.
Yes, it all started out as a mild curiosity in the junkyard. Now it's turned out to be quite a great spirit of adventure, don't you think?
So my introduction to your band, and I was trying to explain to Keith this notion of space rock. There's a very cool Facebook group called Space Rockers Anonymous.
Nice.
And
appropriate.
Yeah. They celebrate bands like Hum, Failure, Shiner. Anybody that's familiar with Spotlights is probably checking all the boxes. They're like, Spotlights have toured with Hum. They've played gigs with Shiner. They've played, so you have connections to a lot of that. And I feel like there are a lot of bands, probably like mine, local bands that appreciate and love all of those other groups. And you hear the references. You go, oh, yeah, I get it. You guys like Hum a lot. You like Failure a lot. And you hear it in the sound. Spotlights is one of the groups that has found its way into that orbit of space rock as a genre.
Yeah, sure.
That are entirely its own thing. It's its own merits. You don't listen to Spotlights and go and put your finger on your nose and go, you're just a Failure worship group.
Right. Well, thanks, man.
There's really something original and genuine to it. And so I want to get into that as a jumping off point, because Tidals, as well, I guess the Spider EP, which one came first?
Tidals. So the very, very first release for Spotlights was Demonstration, actually.
Okay.
It's like a little EP. It was technically demos, why it's called Demonstration. It was the very first thing that we wrote and recorded. Well, not the very first thing we wrote and recorded, but the first release we put out. Sarah and I actually had recorded a song before we ever moved to New York, when Sleep Lady was still active, actually. And it's up on Bandcamp too, if you want to check it out. It's like, if you go all the way to the bottom, it's the last thing. But yeah, Demonstration came out, and then Tidals followed right after. And then we put out the Spiders EP, I think. Yeah.
Okay. But the Tidals EP, I think Hover is as strong an introduction to a band as you can make. The whole Tidals EP is amazing. And I remember hearing it and thinking, is this their first release? It can't be their first release. This is so mature. Nice. And you knew what you were about very early in the group, it seems like. Yeah. I mean, I think so. I think mainly because we went into the whole thing with Spotlights, especially once we moved to New York and we were just kind of starting from scratch, really. Was Sarah and I just didn't want to, and maybe this is why we don't really fit into you can't really just pinpoint the influences right away, is because we really went into it purposefully trying to not do anything in particular. It was just kind of do what's here inside. I appreciate that you say we knew, it sounds like we knew what we were doing, but really that was all just finding out what it was going to be, If you listen to the records beyond that, you can kind of hear it more developing into something maybe even more cohesive in the long run. But thanks. I appreciate that, man. There's a lot of ways that you can approach writing a song. There are a lot of different philosophies. Sure. Tom Petty famously said, "Don't bore us, get to the chorus." I don't think that's you. I think that you as a songwriter take a more cinematic approach. You aren't in a hurry to do anything, but when you decide to do something, when Spotlight shifts, it's dynamic. I think you guys are real heavy hitters in terms of the way you do things. And I said to Keith, I kind of consider Mario the Hans Zimmer of metal.
That's fucking awesome. Thanks, man. Gigantic compliment.
I think one of the things that makes your music unique is the way you take advantage, and apologies for going too far down the rabbit hole, getting too nerdy.
All good.
I think maybe your ear is tuned to hear a wider range of the EQ spectrum. I think you work the low end and have a super, super keen sense of how higher frequencies play with lower frequencies. And it's not just counting and measures and, okay, we're going to do 4 bars of this and then change. You introduce things that, okay, well, that low end, the bass is still going and holding down a pattern, but you'll sprinkle in after 4 or 8 or 16 bars, like, oh, here comes this other thing that is chiming in the high end that I didn't anticipate. Yeah,
a lot of that. I mean, and I'll give Mike from Sleep Lady a lot of credit for that, because he those songs that he wrote, especially like the first album, most of them are like 8-10 minutes long. And we would do one section would be, 12 times instead of 4, where it kind of taught me a lot of patience of and it was cool because it was my first time only playing guitar. I wasn't singing, wasn't doing anything in a band. And I was playing mostly written parts, especially when I first joined. Like, he had the songs basically laid out. And so I was just I would do my thing with the parts, but for the most part, everything was written. So I was able to kind of listen a little closer and learn more about like that kind of drawn out, patient approach to music. And I took a lot of that in. I think I kept it with Spotlights, like taking that approach. It's really just, as a listener too. And I learned a lot about this too. I think maybe realizing it now more so than when I was growing up, but listening to The Cure when I was younger a lot, they do a similar thing where it's like a lot of their songs, maybe not most like the pop songs that people know, but if you know their records, a lot of their songs are really based off like a bass line, and it just goes, and there's little hooks that come in throughout, that build throughout the song, that keep your attention going. So it's like, it's not a purposeful, like, all right, chorus, let's keep their attention with the chorus. It's more like you just keep every little melody is something that's going to stick with you, even any chord, it could even be a drum beat. Like whatever the drums are doing is like a hook, So it's building little ideas throughout this thing instead of like going part, more like developing a piece instead of, well, and we don't always do that. Like sometimes we have songs that are basically verse, chorus, but even within those sections, I like to kind of build the section bit by bit.
Absolutely. I would like to segue into a conversation about your relationship with your bass player. The bass tones on Spotlights records might be my favorite of any bass guitar tone in terms of the sculpting and the EQing and the intensity and ferocity. It's so good. I might suggest to you that your bass player is sleeping with the producer to get maximum visibility in the mix. What? Yeah. I mean,
she's a huge part, and kind of like back to what we were talking about with the building, when you were saying like different frequency, this frequency spectrum, she's a huge part of that. Like it makes it, the way she plays bass and her choices tonally more than anything. Because she's not even really concerned with parts. She doesn't necessarily approach music, like she doesn't like songwriting. She hates sitting in there trying to figure out parts. She would rather like me give her an idea and her be able to take that and be like, all right, how's this going to sound, is more important to her than like how many notes or what, in what register is it or whatever. If it's something she doesn't like, she'll let me know. But it's when she sits down in front of that pedal board and starts finding the sounds that like dictates basically what I'm going to do, you know. And recording wise, production wise, her sound is like, it's everything. If you take one of our sessions and mute the bass out, the whole song goes away. You know?
Yeah.
It's really the foundation of the band.
I think it's important to point out at this point, when we talk about relationship, this is your wife we're speaking of.
This
correct?
is my wife.
Yes, Sarah. Correct. Okay. I don't want people to think there's some sort of sordid activity going on.
And I am the producer, just so you know.
Yeah. Perfect.
So my hunch is correct.
That's an interesting dynamic. How did you guys meet?
I mean, that's partly why this works, is we met through music. I lived in San Diego. I owned a recording studio there, and she had just moved there from Chicago with her band at the time, Marisol. And they lived in the neighborhood, stopped by the studio and checked it out. And we ended up recording a couple, like an EP and an album, I think. And we just hit it off as friends. And right off the bat, you know, her, again, it wasn't like so much her playing, because she was a great player, but it was how like she cared about the sound and the tone, and was concerned about like in the actual mix of the whole thing. Where, you know, a lot of bass players, either they're like, they want to be heard like in the mid range, you know, only, because that's kind of where you actually hear the bass. So they forget about the whole bottom part, and just kind of want to be where the guitar lives as well, which I think causes issues in a lot of songs like that, where she just always wanted to be present in that low end, you know, be heard. You can have the top end, but what's important is the foundation for her. So yeah, we met through music, recording her, and we hit it off as friends. We were friends for years, and eventually started dating and got married.
Awesome.
And by the way, not everybody who gets married enjoys a happy relationship or a symbiotic relationship. I remember so vividly, I was in a wonderful little bowling alley in Cleveland, Ohio called Mahal's. It was the Seismic tour. Seismic had just come out. You'd signed to Ipecac Records. And I remember seeing the band perform, and there was a moment where I think for the two of you, the audience just faded away. Like we didn't exist anymore. And you could see between you and Sarah some unspoken magic where and you gravitated towards one another on the stage, and your riffs can be pummeling. I mean, the music is quite heavy at times, and you guys were laying it down, and you leaned into one another and your foreheads touched. And I don't know any other way to describe it than magic. It was lovely in the middle of this pummeling riff. You guys are both just, the elbows are coming up and down and up and down, and you're jamming so hard. And there's this wonderful tenderness between you where it's like, you guys didn't give a shit that we were there watching you. It was like you were enjoying that moment for yourselves. And I thought it was just marvelous.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we love doing this, period, and we love even more getting to do it together, you know? So it's not only we have this amazing musical relationship, but we get to actually take it home with us, which is awesome. And for a lot of people that doesn't work. For us, we really like each other. I think we're friends more than anything, and we've always had the musical relationship from the start. So
you're on 10 on your guitar. Where can you go from there? Where?
I don't know.
Nowhere, exactly. What we do is, if we need that extra push over the cliff, you know what we do?
Put it up to 11.
11, exactly. One louder.
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
Chris Enriquez, hell of a drummer.
Hell yeah.
Hell of a drummer. Works for Revolver Magazine, is intimately involved in the New York hardcore scene.
Yeah.
It's an interesting dynamic because I think most of the Spotlight's career, you've worked with him remotely. You're mapping out drum parts on your own because you also play the drums and are sending them to Chris to record like in his own sessions, and you're not really writing the records and the music collaboratively in the same room together, at least up to this record. Right. I think maybe you indulged in some of that this time around, but that's a unique experience.
Yeah. So, I mean, when Chris joined the band, really he was just joining as like as a touring drummer. I played all the drums on Tidals and Seismic, except for Aaron Harris, who recorded the record, played on a few, 3 or 4 of those songs on Seismic. So, you know, he was already definitely in the band and our drummer, but he hadn't recorded on anything up until Love and Decay. And I think that starting the relationship like that was good for us because it solidified what was important, which is what we really care about is playing live. That's what we want to do the most. We love making records, but like the real important shit is touring. Can we tour together? Because anybody can make a record together, but can you sit in a van together for months at a time and not kill each other? That's what's really important, you know? So by the time we were able to finally get him on record, we already had, again, like with Sarah and I, we had the roles kind of set out. So I had a lot of those songs already written. I had already kind of programmed the drum ideas in there. And a lot of them were very like, detailed out already to the point where with fills and everything. And he's such a kick-ass drummer and not an egomaniac whatsoever. And I think it just works for us. Again, it makes it easy. We're all busy doing other shit, especially him. The guy is like nonstop, plays in multiple bands, is always doing stuff. So we never had the time, even when we lived in New York, to just like, let's go jam 3 times a week for 3 hours and see what happens. Like we needed to get music out. So it just worked out. It worked out great. And now living here in Pittsburgh, it doesn't really affect us because we're already used to that, you know? So before tours, he flies out a few days beforehand, we rehearse, and then we go. The relationship between the 3 of us, which I think is such a huge part of being in a band that people don't realize, is the personal dynamics have to be there. Like otherwise you might make some cool shit, but it's going to be dangerous and it might end up not lasting because of people's personalities or how they feel about things. So I'm super lucky that, especially with them 2, they kind of allow me to be the control freak that I am and like, you know, get away with all that.
And now for something completely different.
Tell us about the criteria that goes into what makes it on the record and what doesn't make it on the record.
I mean, I guess it varies. So usually, like in this particular instance, when we were kind of like writing the ideas, I didn't really have like a vision for the record beginning to end yet. So like I didn't know, it didn't have a sound, you know, like a quote unquote sound.
Sure.
But once we had maybe like a few songs written that kind of made sense together, I started seeing more of like, okay, this is the direction that this should go in. And the ones that we had written that just didn't fit, like either sonically or just vibe wise, we just put away, you know. But that wasn't really until more towards the end, I think, when we had maybe like 10, 11 songs worked out, then I started picking stuff that made sense together.
You guys signed to Ipecac. And Ipecac Records run and owned partially by Mike Patton, Faith No More, Mr. Bungle. I'd say that's a relatively prestigious and high profile label. So how do you go from the Tidals EP to Seismic being a pretty big debut full length?
Yeah, I mean, man, we were just as surprised as anybody. Once we had everything kind of ready to go and we were already starting to plan like what we were going to do for the album, we started sending out, you know, we figured let's try and get this on a label first and then, you know, record the album for real. And so we sent to Ipecac and Greg. So Aaron already had a relationship with them through ISIS because they were on Ipecac as well. And, so he was going to record it. We had a little bit of like a thing there already. And Greg, the owner of Ipecac, who's Mike Patton's manager, he's the other half basically of Ipecac. He liked it right away and was into it and was like, I love it. This is cool, but I really don't think that Mike's going to dig it. He was like, I don't know if he's going to be into it. And basically their philosophy is that like the two of them have to like the band. Otherwise they don't put it out. Even if one person's fully in love with it and the other one's not, they don't put it out. So whatever, we waited a day, and then a day later, Greg wrote us back and was like, Mike loves it. Let's do it.
Wow.
So it was just like one day to the next. It happened pretty quickly. And yeah, I mean, if we had a choice, we would have gone with Ipecac. It was kind of like our dream label, mainly because of how they treat their bands, just the philosophy that they have with like creative. They just want people to be creative and do what they do. And yeah, we couldn't have asked for a better place. They're awesome.
To me, a hugely successful debut full length. I love getting into specific songs. Let's drill into What Is This? Where Are We? Which is a great song title. In that song, that's very demonstrative of that full spectrum of EQ because, there's a very solid groove that the song establishes. And then, 3, maybe 4 minutes in, you get this new instrumentation. So and I'm not sure if it's a guitar that's going through a very specific effect or if it's actually a handbell, but there's like a handbell type of tone that takes on that high end, and then almost like a Hammond B3 organ holding down a drone note in there. And it all comes together. That's where I get that Hans Zimmer vibe is you layer shit it may just be a drone note, but it's a totally different instrument and an interesting instrument. It's like who puts a handbell in there?
Well, that's literally a Hammond B3. That's actually what it is. It was a real one in the studio through Leslie that we recorded on that song. And then those bells, I don't know, from the very beginning of the band, if you go back to Demonstration, I forget what track it is on, like maybe track 2, it's called Bad Animals. There's a song based around those bells, like that bell sound. For some reason, like I was like obsessed with that. And it just seemed to like be this thing that I kept wanting to do throughout all the albums, like Tidals, on Walls. One of the like main parts of that song is that little melody. It's just such a cool way to kind of throw a melody in. It's percussive, but it's melodic, and it's not too long of a tone. You can delay it really cool. You can do a lot of things, with effects on it that sound cool. So it's just literally like a little plugin that I use. And then it just, it showed up again in that song. So, and I'm sure there's a little bit of it on every record, on the new record. probably a little bit here and there. So.
You have always had a confidence in performing live that, you know, I think a lot of bands take on this mentality that if we don't have a member per sound, you know, and everybody has a responsibility, like you're going to play the keyboard and execute the bells, and you're going to play the guitar, and Sarah's going to hold down the bass, and we need a live drummer. Like, you've gone on tours with the Melvins where it was just you and Sarah, and you're just running triggers. You're kind of eschewing musical norms, and that you don't have that traditional sense of, well, we've got to have 5 members in this band for us to tour.
I mean, you know, it all goes back to like what I was talking about earlier with the relationships. So adding another person is a whole other person, man. They come with a lot of shit, you know, a whole new ego, a whole new personality, you know, a lot of cost because it's just another hotel room, another person eating every day, just everything. So
more luggage.
More luggage. Yeah, just more farts, everything. So I think that's really number one. And then the rest of it is just Sarah and I set out to do this. And, you know, our motto at the beginning was nothing's going to fucking stop us. It just, we've never approached this in the way where like, it's like, oh, well, you know, that's like part of the band. And if he leaves, then the band is over. Like, no, we don't care. It's like, the mission is to keep going. So when that Melvins tour came up and Chris was our drummer at the time, but his job at the time didn't let him travel as much. So, and it was a 3-month tour. So it's a lot to ask somebody, you know, with a regular job. So he could only do, I think, maybe 2 weeks. He ended up doing like 13, 14 shows out of like 80 that we did that year or on that tour. And we were looking at other drummers. We started talking to other people, but everybody could do like 2 weeks, 1 month, 1 week, whatever. And Sarah and I were like doing laundry one day and just being like, fuck, nobody can do this. So we were just like, let's just do it without it. Like, I have all the drum tracks. I know how to trigger everything off the helix like I do. And let's just fucking do it. And we were just like, all right. And yeah, Chris started the tour. He did, I think, maybe like 5-6 shows with us, 7 shows in a row. And then from one day to the next, one day we had a drummer, the next day we didn't for another month or 2. You know?
Interesting.
It was pretty crazy. But again, it's like we had that opportunity. We weren't going to throw it away just because we think it's not cool to play the tracks or whatever. So when people, you know, every once in a while, people will be like, what are you guys, you know, why are you using tracks or why are you using fake shit or whatever? It's like, well, if you want to pay for somebody to be on tour with us, make sure they're awesome and pay for all their shit, bring them on so they can be on stage going, bong, bing, bong. Okay. Like, yeah. Is that really going to make the band better for you? You know?
I want to be a doctor. In pediatrics, I mean, when I babysit, I have a great time. So I think I'd like working with children.
Take us back to the younger Mario.
Okay.
When did you decide that I want to do music for the rest of my life? What did you listen to? Was there one crystallizing moment that was like, this is it. This is what I'm doing?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was probably like, I started playing guitar when I was like 10. Just before that, I was really started. I just, you know, MTV, we were all watching MTV at that point. I'm 46 now. So like, whatever, it was 36 years ago watching MTV, you know, loving just like the performance of things. I remember like a lot of the videos back then, especially like the hair metal videos had just like, where it was like the big fucking stage with all the performance, doing knee slides with the guitars and shit.
Yep.
That was kind of like part of my inspiration to just want to play guitar. Hey, sorry.
It's all right.
Louisa. So once I finally decided to do it, I asked my mom if I could like take guitar lessons or just try it out. As soon as I got that thing in my hand, I actually tried bass first and I liked it, but it just didn't really, I was like, I don't know. want to be able to like make those sounds that people are making, you know, like the squeals and the fucking distortion. I didn't know what it was at the time, but so I went back to the store and I rented a guitar instead. And yeah, as soon as I kind of like learned a few chords, I was really into the Cure at that point. Like my sister, I had stolen like all her Cure records and tapes. And my oldest sister was really the one that kind of pushed me. She was like, all right, well, learn how to play Jumping Someone Else's Train. And like push me out, you know. And so I just started learning all these Cure songs. And as soon as I kind of did that, nothing else really mattered. Like it was that, maybe skateboarding, and that's it. There was a point where like, you know, where your parents were like, so what do you think you want to do when you grow up? I was probably like 11, 12 years old. And I was like, I want to play music. That's it. And ever since then, I haven't changed my mind.
I got to tell you, in this previous conversation, the previous 2 minutes, I heard knee slides. I heard everything. Don't get me wrong, Mario, but I heard knee slides, and then I heard the Cure, and all that's going through my head is Robert Smith trying to do knee slides down the stage or something. I'm trying to visualize that.
Oh man, that's amazing.
Imagine Plain Song with
yeah, right. Like a slow motion knee slide. He's just like
that's
with the hair just going back.
Learn to Breathe, Ghost of a Glowing Forest, Continue the Capsize, Hang Us All. Mario, are you okay?
Really, actually, Sarah contacted us. This is an intervention about your mental health.
Yeah, right. She's like, I'm kind of worried about him. Yeah, I'm good. I think actually, like all those subjects and you know the kind of like dark themes of everything is like it comes from a positive. Well, all the darkness. It's not so much like an internal depression of my own or things like that. You know, they're more. It's more like dealing with those things in a positive way. So like bringing those things out in a way that for me, they're things I think about, but not necessarily are in more of a philosophical way than a personal way. You know what I mean? Sure. I mean, a lot of the shit is personal to me, but when I put it out there, it's more to be like expressed in a philosophical way for people to think about it and interpret on their own too.
I don't think Kiss the Ring was on any of the full lengths. It's its own single, right?
Yeah, that was just a single we did before we did a tour with Life and Times, and we kind of just did it because of that. We figured let's write a song and put it out before the tour.
So if you're listening and this is your first exposure to Spotlights, Kiss the Ring features, instead of Mario behind the microphone, Alan Epley, famously of the Life and Times and Shiner, on the lead vocal, and it's a really successful track.
Thanks, man. Yeah, he killed it.
He did. you've toured with both Life and Times and Shiner with Spotlights.
Yeah.
I think it's an incredible story. You're gearing up for this tour with Shiner. Josh Newton in Shiner is the guitar tech for Kings of Leon, a gig that I think probably pays his rent and bills.
Oh yeah.
And they sprung on him on quite short notice. Hey man, we need you to go to, and I don't even remember where it was, but like Kings of Leon were taking off, like Bahrain or something.
It was like a prince. Crazy. Yeah, it was. That's what it was. It was a prince. The Prince of Bahrain invited them to play like an inauguration or something.
Oh, come on, guys. He didn't invite them. He paid them a large sum of money to come over.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly. Invited.
Yeah. So Shiner as a band, like you've got these dates booked, and Shiner's like, shit, our guitar player is gonna have to bow out.
Yeah.
How the fuck do you go? Because it was very short notice.
Yeah, it was like 4 to 5 days.
Oh.
How do you go from 4 days away from the tour? Like, we're gonna either have to cancel or find somebody else. Hey, Mario, why don't you learn an entire set of Shiner songs and play the role of Josh on this tour?
Yeah, that was crazy, man. Again, maybe it's the mentality of like, just fucking get it done. You know, no excuses. Al called me, and yeah, exactly like you said. He was like, either we don't do it, or we think you would be awesome. Like, can you do it? Are you into it? And I was like, what am I going to say no? I've been a Shiner fan for years. I love all those guys. Like, you know, I've become good friends with all of them. And we have a tour book that kind of depends on Shiner at this point, because this was post-COVID. You know, it was kind of like a co-headline tour, but we needed Shiner there to make it what it was going to be. And so I was like, fuck yeah, I'll do it. Like, I'll figure it out. This was just before Chris was getting into town, I think 2 days after that for us to rehearse. So I had 2 days, I think, of just, and I was lucky enough, like I didn't have any work left at that point. I was like, I could just spend the days learning songs. So, and you know, a lot of the older songs I knew in my head somewhat, although it's just, they have such like intertwining angular parts that a lot of the stuff I don't even know who's who. So
this is not an easy chore. This is not like learning a set of Jimmy Buffett covers where you're like, oh, A to C to D, like I got it. Like, Shiner have very complex guitar interplay.
It's amazing. So luckily, one thing that really helped is Josh had time to make some videos for me, and he's left-handed and I'm right-handed. So like the videos, it was really easy to see what he was playing. So I would listen to the song, and if I couldn't figure something out, I would watch the video and figure it out. I mean, that sped things up quite a bit. And then it was just memory, like trying to be like, okay, fucking memorize, just repeating parts over and over and over again until we got it. And then we rehearsed once, like we had 1 day to rehearse, and then we played a show.
Jesus.
But you know, like, it's fucking Josh Newton, so my biggest concern was the sounds. I was like, because I can flip-flop around the guitar, but to get it to sound like Shiner, I had to really like try. You know, I know the sound well enough, and luckily, like I'm good enough with the Helix. If I didn't have a Helix, put it this way, if I didn't have a Helix, I don't think that would have worked out.
What's a Helix? I don't know what that is.
So Helix, it's a guitar processor, basically. Like it's a pedal and amp modeler is what it is, really.
Okay.
Made by Line 6.
Okay.
And it's incredible. It basically like changed my life when I found it, because Spotlights, we have so many things going on with the track playback, with all the pedals that I used to have to kind of make my sound work and all the effects and everything. You know, we needed a audio interface. It was a bunch of shit. A MIDI controller to trigger all the samples, all the pre-recorded stuff.
Right.
And so the Helix has all of that in one box, basically. It's an audio interface. It's a modeler for all the pedals that I used.
Okay.
I run my vocals through it. I trigger all the MIDI stuff through it. Now,
wow.
Yeah, so it basically, it's just a lifesaver, and it sounds amazing too. So
sounds like it, yeah.
Well, and Sarah has been featured. You know, there are people like me who the boutique guitar pedal community has exploded. I mean, it's a terrific and painfully expensive hobby to indulge in. Sarah has been featured on, because there are people that will just go out to YouTube and like, I want to know more about your pedal board. I want to know about the sequence of the pedals and which brands you like. So Sarah was on, you know, one of those Earthquaker devices where they basically, the whole YouTube show is about talk me through your pedal board. And I think in that, I'm not sure if it was that episode or something else she did about pedals, but she referred to herself as a pedal farmer.
that makes sense. Yeah.
And I think Josh is like that.
Yep.
That's no small task to program the Helix to do all of those varying tones and learn the songs on, you know, okay, well, it's a C chord here, and then because it's Shiner, it's probably a bunch of like inverted, you know, I gotta twist my hand into a pretzel to make this shape.
Well, you know, that's the thing too, is like the way they write their songs, it makes it sound like that. But a lot of the stuff was a lot, I don't want to say easy, but simpler, you know, like a lot simpler than you would imagine, because when you split the stuff apart, it's not like that crazy, really. You know, a lot of it is just little melodies, but then Al is doing some other melody and it sounds like this like giant part. And Paul too, the way Paul plays bass, it all fits together as this puzzle that makes it sound crazy. When you split it up, everybody's kind of doing a very similar or simple thing. Not always, but for the most part.
Yeah. And I do think Alan Epley is from another planet.
Oh, he's incredible, dude.
Kiss the Ring, I think, was before Love and Decay. Love and Decay kind of continued that theme of, you know, Hang Us All. There were a lot of really heavy, dark topics that you were engaging with.
Yeah.
You know, Continue the Capsize, Far From Falling, Xerox. These are all, for lack of a better word, they're bangers.
Thanks, man.
And you continued to grind on the road. I mean, you are an incessant touring band. You guys are always working. And then COVID.
Yeah. And then COVID.
Which is a punchline for a lot of bands, but like almost everybody else, it seems like you didn't stop. I mean, you were still writing, and you also put this is where the Bandcamp page is. You know, if you only listen to music on Spotify, you're selling yourself short. There's hidden treasure out there on Bandcamp.
Yeah,
and you did a bunch of cover songs. Can I just tell you, when I hear a cover song that I feel like exceeds the original, it excites me.
Oh yeah. Thanks, man.
And to out Radiohead, man, fist bump. Dude, the Radiohead cover you guys did in the middle of the pandemic was so fucking great.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I was pretty happy with that one. That was full like early pandemic. It was actually just I started putting that together maybe like a few days before we actually had to like lockdown or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah was on tour doing merch with Ohm at the time. And so they were like in the middle of like canceling shows and nobody knew it was going to happen. And I was just home alone, like fucking being like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
And I've always loved that song. And it came together really quickly. Like I just put down a little drum beat, which was the first idea that I had. And it just kind of spilled out really quickly. And that kind of just gave us the idea to do more. That's why we ended up doing a bunch of covers over COVID.
We Are All Atomic. Did that start off as a partnership with like, I think it's like a special like a vinyl record club, right?
Yeah, it's a label called Blues Funeral that does that. So, and it's called Post Wax. It's basically like a subscription based vinyl collectors club type thing. We were part of the first one they had done. It's basically like this beautiful package box of, I think it's maybe like 6 bands, something like that. I can't remember. But yeah, and all the artwork, all the packaging is just like impeccable. And you paid a certain amount and you basically get the subscription. You get all these records for a pretty fucking good deal for what it was. And Jad, the guy that owns Blues Funeral, he got in touch with us well before. I mean, I think we had started talking about it while we were still in New York. So like early 2018. And I had an idea of what we wanted to do. But after we finally finished the Love and Decay tour and came home, and we were in Pittsburgh at the time finally, and I was set up in my basement to record again, then we just busted that out. And a lot of that stuff, like two or three of those ideas are from like the very beginning of Spotlights, from like 2013, basically, that I never did anything with. So I kind of took some of that stuff and with a bunch of other ideas, and when I was putting it together, it started making this like one piece. It started seeing it as more like one piece. So instead of doing like song titles for each song, I just named it parts because it's meant to be played as one whole continuous thing. And yeah, and it sucks. It came out in 2020, right in the middle of COVID. We didn't get the tour for it or anything, but luckily Post Wax it's a great label and they have such a diehard following, especially on the vinyl side of things, that like it just blew out. Like it sold out in months.
It's a very cool release.
It's cool. It was really fun to make.
I am not the only person who recognizes that you have an ear for maybe a broader spectrum range and mix. You really know how to mix a record, I think, well. We love to establish connective tissue from one episode to another.
Sure.
Last interview we did was Jeremy Chatelaine, who was the lead singer of the band Handsome.
Nice.
With Tom Capone from the band Quicksand.
Yeah.
You have toured with Quicksand as their sound guy.
Yep.
And teched on a tour, a pretty robust tour, I would add, with the band Failure.
Yeah.
So we'll get from the past episode to this one by saying Quicksand is that point of connection.
Yeah.
Those are two groups that I think a lot of people are huge fans of. Those had to be cool experiences, but also learning experiences for you.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think especially Failure. Like with Quicksand, I've been a huge fan of Quicksand since I was 15 years old, 16 years old. And so we had already toured with Quicksand. I think in 2018 we did a short tour with them in Glassjaw, and so for us that was just like that's one of those bucket list moments, was to meet them, and they were so fucking cool, and it was a great tour. And luckily, we kept up the relationship going since then. So when they asked me to do the tour doing sound, I was like so stoked because I know the songs. I love the band. I love the people, and I get to fucking mix Quicksand. So it was just such a fun thing. It was a cool tour. And then with Failure, as far as like learning experience, it was such a technically intense tour with all of Ken's stuff that he likes to do. And we kind of took it to another level. Like he approached me sort of because I am an engineer, because I knew Ableton, a lot of the stuff I do with Spotlights was the reason why he wanted me to do the tour, because of the Ableton stuff that I do, like all the MIDI stuff. He was getting more into like the playback side of things and wanting to use MIDI more and you know, to the point where like we got all his pedal boards, everything was controlled by Ableton, so he didn't have to hit buttons anymore. You know, he could concentrate on just playing and singing. And so I learned a lot from that. And it's for this tour that we're doing now, I incorporated a lot of that for myself, which is awesome. And you know, just they're such a fucking great, technically perfect band. Watching them every night and watching their flaws and realizing like what shit doesn't matter to people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Some of those things, like you're like, when you're on that side, it sounds like perfection, but when you see it every single night, you start to see like, oh, okay. It's okay that it's not, they're not actually just fucking robots and perfect. They're just that good of a band that it doesn't matter because it comes across. And sonically, he has such a good ear that like, it's hard and good to work with somebody like that. Cause I am sort of a control freak myself and he's like a mega control freak himself. So like, we got along fine, but we got along well, really, like actually really well. But you know, it's cool to be put in that position where you have to like just shut up and learn, which is awesome.
You guys are both guitar players. I don't play an instrument. So
okay,
I want to make sure, is it Ableton
Live? Yeah.
Is that the same as a Helix? What they sound similar? Am I correct?
No. So it's all good. Ableton is like it's a DAW. It's a digital audio workstation. So it's a program that you can use to record music. Basically, at the most basic explanation. I
ask these questions, Mario, because I'm looking for advertisers. I want to know who to go out to. I want very specific advertisers.
Get them in there.
Yeah.
Get them in there.
Brought to you by Ableton. Well, that does bring us current, and you are about to embark on a 41-date tour.
Yeah.
You are opening for the Melvins and Mr. Bungle, which means you're going on tour with your boss.
Yeah. Don't fuck up.
Yeah.
Don't fuck up.
Yeah.
In advance of the record release, which I think by the time this episode is edited and drops, I think the album will be out. But in advance of the album coming out, you put out the Seance EP, right. Which is 5 songs. If my understanding is correct, 2 of which are on the album and 3 didn't make the cut.
Yeah.
I listened to the Seance EP and thought, if these 3 songs didn't make the cut, we are in for a big fucking treat.
Thanks, man. I think you are. I mean, if you're a fan of the band, we're really excited about it. And like the response to just the singles so far on the EP have been like amazing. So it's such an intense thing to make an album and get through the whole process that when it's out of your hands and it's everybody else's time to like make their decision on it and tell you how good or bad it is. It's really nice, you know, when you get such positive feedback. So it's inspiring and exciting for us to go out on tour for it, especially.
Sunset Burial and Algorithmic are the 2 that are on the album.
Correct.
I think it still sounds like Spotlights, but there are departures. There are new elements, and I think one of those is with the approach to the vocal.
Okay, yeah. We had a focus on this one, which was only that. Like, I don't want to make another, you know, quote unquote Spotlights record. So from the songwriting to the production to whatever, of course, it's still us. It's still me. It's still, so I think the sound is still going to be there. And, you know, we weren't specifically trying to like make a fucking hard left turn. We're just trying to just not repeat ourselves, really. The vocals standing out more is more a result of like the arrangement and the writing, the way we kind of wrote everything. Really, almost every song on this album is stemmed from like a drum beat idea, whether it was mine or Chris's. And I mean, honestly, like most of it aren't even ideas that we ended up using. It just triggered my brain in certain directions that wouldn't happen if I just sit down with a guitar, you know. I think especially songs like that, like Sunset Burial, Algorithmic, you know, you'll hear there's like maybe 4 or 5 songs on the record that were really just based off of that approach. There are a couple songs that are, again, like with, I think, all our records, stuff that I pulled from way, way far away, like 8 years ago. There's a couple songs that, that are on there that they just never fit anywhere else. So they never really got finished. But every time we go to record, I'll dig through like all the archives and just kind of listen to old stuff and see if anything kind of hits me. And in this case, there was 2 of them.
In Sunset Burial, at the 4-minute and 20-second mark, not to be, you know, too specific, but there's a moment in that song where I thought, is that a fucking death rattle?
Yeah, it's the vibra slap.
Okay.
Yeah.
It achieves a real specific vibe.
Yeah. Keith, the vibra.
Yeah, thank you.
What's a vibra?
Thank you.
So you've heard it. You definitely heard it. Like if you heard it, you would be like, I've heard that before, but not know what it is. It's basically this instrument with a little ball and a kind of like a wood block on the other end on this like metal piece.
Oh yeah.
And you slap it, and it sounds like a rattlesnake.
There you go. Got it.
Sounds like a rattlesnake.
I didn't know the name of that thing.
It's a vibra slap.
It's a whole educational lesson for me tonight.
Yeah.
And present and accounted for in both of those tunes, in Algorithmic and in Sunset Burial. It may be the gnarliest bass tone ever committed to tape.
I think so.
It's epic, man.
Yeah. And you know, like there's a song that we haven't put out yet called The Alchemist, which is track 2 on the record. But when you hear that, like, that moment in that song is basically what gave me the idea in my head. I was like, that's what this record should sound like. That bass tone, like those, whatever she's doing with those pedals, that's the sound of this record. Like, I wanted it to sound like you're in a tiny little dead room getting just killed by a speaker. You know?
I know at one point a review of her pedal board, she's like, "Oh yeah, it's the way huge swollen pickle."
This time it's more a lot more like fuzz based and a lot more Earthquaker stuff. We used a lot of Earthquaker stuff on this one. It's crazy because when you really break down her chain, there's not that much going on. A lot of times it's just like for Algorithmic and for example, that's literally just the Earthquaker eruptor pedal and her orange amp, and that's it. Nothing else. But again, she has like a way of hitting those strings and EQing her amp, which I think is a huge thing too. Like that, there's all that low mid and low end information just makes those speakers react in a certain way.
You have consistently proven that there is something unique about the three of you making music together. This album seems like it's just the next natural. It's a very natural evolution. You're not doing anything that's off brand.
Right.
But it's if you were impressed by previous Spotlights music, it seems like this album is just that on steroids.
Nice. Thanks, man. And there's saxophone on it.
What?
Well, let's, as Beck said, let's get crazy with the cheese whiz.
Yeah.
You know, one of the fun things doing with Geoff is he turns me on to so much new music.
Sure.
Twice he's batting 2 home runs, you know, with Handsome and now Spotlights. This is great. I mean, it's been really great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
Thanks for coming on, man. I hope that the tour is a massive success.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, brother. Best of luck. And I hope you sell a gajillion copies of the new record.
Thank you, man. I hope so too.
All right.
All right. We'll see you guys out there. Take care.
Man.
Thanks again.
Thanks.
Thank you, buddy.
Many thanks to Mario for his time. Be sure to check out Spotlights on tour starting April 26th.
Our theme song is Rocket Sled by Blip. Abandoned Albums was recorded at Thunderlove Studios.
Written and produced by Keith R. Higgins and Geoff Calhoun.
Engineered and mixed by Steve Beasley with the help of Mike Hunt. Edited by AJ Royce.
The Spotlight songs you heard during this podcast were Learn to Breathe, Hover, What Is This, Where Are We, Kiss the Ring, Sunset Burial. And you also heard a cover of Radiohead's All I Need. Be sure to check out Spotlights on your favorite streaming service and on their Bandcamp page.
Original music by Mike Pellegrino.
If you like what you've heard, please be sure to subscribe and leave us a rating. It really does help. Thanks for listening.
At Twitter, we are at Abandoned Albums, and on Instagram, we are at Abandoned_albums.
Grazie. Bailey Leaf. Rob Janicki. Mike Pellegrino. Therina Vella. Ronnie Barnett. S.W. Loudon. Michael Janicki. Peyton Janicki. And our executive producer,
This is Thunderlove.
And now, until we meet again next time, I remain as always obediently yours.
Abandoned Albums is a production of Paw Print Media.